Uh, Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Good evening to all of you who are here for yet another wisdom talk. This time with a person that me and many others are fairly inspired by. I have with me today Amitabh Behar. Amitabh is the CEO of Oxfam, and I would still say more than that, a voice of our collective, a leader who inspires civil society both in India and around the world. So, Amitabh, firstly, thank you. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here and very interested in the Wisdom Talk format. As you said, this is more of a conversation, so I'm very excited about it. And I already see very interesting people, as in I just saw Sayag Bhai, so he's a legend in certainly the area that I come from. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, several amazing people in the audience also. Uh, so yeah, let's imagine there's a fireside. We're all sitting around it. There's a nice bonfire, maybe some nice hot chocolate in our hands or some chai. And I'm going to start with our traditional first question that we have. And to you, I think, Amitabh, I'll ask it in two, three contexts, and you can pick which context you'd like to answer. So the question is, what is wisdom according to you? And I think with someone like you who comes from different facets, I would say one is, of course, what is wisdom in your life experience? But also, what is wisdom in today's times? We're finding ourselves located in these times and everything that's unfolding around us. And what is wisdom as a sector? So, I mean, I think the canvas is broad open, inviting you to just hop into whatever comes for you. As what do you see as wisdom? Amitabh, you'll have to
Yeah. So thank you, Abhishek. And that's a very interesting opening question. I assume you said it's your standard question, so I assume you ask this question to everyone who comes.
Yeah.
And therefore, eventually, when you have, say, 25 different people sharing their ideas on wisdom, I think just collection of that would be fascinating.
Yes.
Just do that, just do one session on how people define wisdom. I think it would be fascinating. So coming to the question that you're asking me, I would say the first is that there's a fundamental difference between intelligence and wisdom. And that's something that we need to appreciate. When I say wisdom, I think wisdom is something which layers and is the fundamental bedrock of intelligence. So it's a blend of intelligence along with a normative framework. So I think that would be a very, very critical definition for me. So wisdom is people's ability to engage with their surroundings with a worldview. So that I think would be really wisdom according to me. And very often we don't talk about it. And in terms of the sector, I would say that this is really the time when we need wisdom and not just intelligent, smart ways of working. So for the sector at the moment, wisdom would mean being able to look at all our actions via the prism of what are the fundamental values that we have. And just to give you an example, as in I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but what is reading of the Indian Constitution without the preamble or the prastavna? It is the prastavna, the preamble of the Constitution, which gives real meaning and understanding of the entire Constitution. And that is where wisdom is. So, this in the last few years, the Supreme Court has started talking about the constitutional morality.
Mm-hmm.
How do you read the Constitution without the constitutional morality? You'll make, I would say, even you can probably commit blunders in interpreting the Constitution if it's devoid of the constitutional morality. So that's what I would say. It's blending the two. So if in today's time, for me, if you say that wisdom is that Oxfam should not, rather should really worry about its FCRA, and therefore not do inequality work, not do the work around living wages for the informal sector, etc., etc. I would say that's not wisdom.
Hmm.
That's at best being pragmatic, and I have issues with that. However, if you tell me that go back, just to the founding ideals of Oxfam, if it
Hmm.
is about inequality, then go ahead. Yes, try and engage with the world so that your FCRA is restored. And I'm saying this because I assume that most of the people will know what's happening, uh, but with an understanding of how you will still continue to work on inequality. Yeah, so sorry, it's already been I've covered two of your pieces. I just wanted in terms of the personal bit. I'll just add that if we are able to go even beyond the normative, wisdom is also to bring in the emotions that we often feel. So, being in touch with your emotions within a normative framework, and then having your regular intellectual uh, characteristic. How do you blend all this would be wisdom for me.
Hmm. 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 You answered it from all three. Thanks for that. I think what intrigues me a lot is two parts. One is the reference to the normative and the reference to the worldview. I hold this question of what is the right way? Is there a right worldview in today's times? And what is it? Is it a Ranbhumi? Is it a human family? Is it time for us? Like what kind of worldviews are, how do I say? I'm trying to capture this, but when you mentioned worldviews and normative, I'm really holding this question of his worldviews. What's your worldview, for example? How do you view this? Do you view this as a dharma yudh? Do you view this as cycles of time? And I'm very curious about your worldview. And yeah, what, given the choice of worldviews, what's the right way to view what is happening? Maybe I would be curious to know if you have something on that one.
So this is really a fireside conversation, as you said. Okay,
Yeah.
so in terms of worldview, the way I used it, it's probably slightly different from the way you are perceiving it. When I
Hmm.
said a worldview, I meant your ability to integrate the multiple dimensions that you're engaged with. And
Hmm.
there's an understanding of them coming together
Hmm. Hmm.
and how you are then going to engage with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it is not that I'm a social activist. Therefore, what happened in the budget today is not irrelevant for me.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it also should not be irrelevant that what is the current Netflix most popular
Hmm. Hmm.
series
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's how I look at a worldview. But that worldview is largely, I would say, governed, mediated by the normative framework that I was talking of.
Hmm.
Because but I just want that also the macro. It's not about just me living with a normative framework.
Hmm.
It's me engaging with that larger world with a normative framework.
Hmm.
So that's how I would look at the worldview. And
Hmm. Hmm.
and to respond to your question, I would not say that the worldview gets defined by the times that you live in. The responses to what you need to do is defined by the world we live in. But the worldview is intact for me.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
not changed.
Hmm.
And my worldview, because you asked, it remains of whether you call it the Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. I have truly believed, and I don't hesitate in saying that, for instance, because these are big ideas at the moment, that nationalism for me was only when I was watching a cricket match, or when I'm tracking cricket. So in the arena of sport, I've still not been able to get out of a identity of nationalism. Otherwise, I do believe that I think it's time that we, for me, in a way, I'm sharing my worldview. We have to move out of now even idea of nation states. It is one world that we live in, where compassion, empathy, love are the fundamental pillars, which then get built on the idea of, say, justice, freedom. So those are the ones that then give me a worldview, and that world then obviously helps me engage with what's happening today in Russia and Ukraine. I should be able to respond to it. Yeah, and I thought, one very interesting way we used to do it in JNU. So I can tell you, what I thought it was a fascinating exercise. People do it, and we did it as an exercise, that we would say that let's not really get into the editorials of what Indian Express and Times of India would write. Let's do our own editorials.
Nice.
So, which is an ability to comment on the entirety of a story, what's happening. And that gives you your worldview.
It's coming to me in what you're sharing. I think so. There's a lot there. And I think two things that are where my curiosity is leading me is one is the noise around and joining the dots, because you said worldview is about integrating various kind of data points to make sense. And sense making is becoming so difficult. Like, at least if I look into my own experience, like it's like what's going on, what's real anymore, which signals to pay attention to. And the other, the source of courage, right, Amitabh, like what you shared. To me, courage is something that I'm picking up from just the courage to do the right thing. So I want to move this to maybe a personal domain of how do you make sense and where do you draw your courage from, your capacities from. Yeah, I would love to hear what's your source of making sense and then having the courage to respond.
And so Abhishek, you've kind of touched something very critical. According to me, and as you said, yes, you are looking at what Ambedkar called, in a slightly different context. It is the grammar of anarchy at the moment. What you see all around is really that grammar of anarchy, and there's a complete dissonance. And the dissonance is so enormous that it is like cacophony. The entire effort of the worldview that we were talking of is to convert different sounds into an orchestra. It's an organized composition, whereas what you're actually listening to is cacophony and the grammar of anarchy. So yes, you're absolutely right. All of us are finding it very, very difficult, particularly in our actions, in our inner minds. We might still have the sanity of being able to engage with the world in a particular way, to have our worldview tell us what is the right thing to do. However, in our actions, we find it fairly difficult. And therefore, I just wanted to underscore what you said, courage. Courage seems like one of the most critical values at this moment. And we sincerely lack it. We lack it as individuals. We lack it as society. The courage of your conviction is kind of, I would say, missing. And yes, there's a huge cost to be paid for being courageous. But I think that's one of the critical ones, and then when we would be talking about leadership, I think in today's time, courage has always been important, but courage is the most critical factor. You asked me a specific question. Just to be fair to the question, where do I find my courage? I would want to be self-critical, and I'll still say that, am I courageous enough? Because the times probably need much greater courage. I try, I strive, but I find myself inadequate in terms of what needs to be done. But I find it from the deep conviction that I have. For me, my it is almost my religious being is my faith in the values that I'm talking of, and it is, I'm fortunate that the work I do also has the same values. So justice is something which is religion for me. I'm just using that as a shorthand because we understand how one engages with religion. So that's where my courage comes in. But I just want to be also self-critical, that I think in these times we need much greater courage, which is probably one of the leadership gaps that we are looking at in the social sector, in, I would say, across the country, but certainly in the social sector.
Yeah, maybe this is also a good time to segue to the topic of the conversation, which is what kind of leadership our sector needs. And we already started talking about courage as a capacity. And I'm just wondering aloud that when you started with the FCRA, we also, a lot of organizations lean on funding from the same 1% that we then have judgments about. The direct, indirect threats of doing this work. And also us being in silos, somehow I feel just everybody is so busy in mission mode that I don't know, we're not reaching those hands out and holding them so that it becomes one circle. So I'm just wondering aloud, as from your vantage view, what are some of these capacities that we need to intentionally cultivate?
Okay, yeah. So, Abhishek, on that, I think that there'll always be a journey, and there'll be always multiple things that we would need to do. But just to be more specific, one I've already talked of. I think courage is central at the moment. The second, I think, is in some ways responding to your concern about silos. I think we need to fundamentally understand the difference between the corporate world and the social sector. That I think our fundamental framing has to be of collaboration, and it cannot be of competition. And very often we miss that. So as organizational leaders, when it comes to about networking, then maybe people try and collaborate. But largely within organizations, there's a sense of competition, even in the social sector. And we know, as in the reasons are, who will get the funding eventually, and who will get, maybe if it's an individual driven entity, who will get the Magsaysay award, or in sometimes just the fundamentalism about you're probably not looking at any of this credit, but just the fundamentalism about the way I do or we think is the right way of changing society.
Yes.
So that all that leads to siloization or working in competition vis-a-vis others. But if we fundamentally reframe our work as an idea of collaboration, I think we'll be much better off. So I'm not doing what our Prime Minister does. So from competition to collaboration, then courage. So another C. I was thinking of another C if I can think of it, but I won't do that. Yeah. So the third, I think, which interestingly, maybe it's very deeply close to me, is this ability to link the micro and the macro. I think leadership is so much about micro and macro, and particularly in the social sector. So your ability to say that, okay, I can run a good school is fantastic, and kudos to you if you're running a good school. However, I would really see you becoming a leader or helping us being led, if you're able to say why that is a good school and how we can have many more schools adopt what we are doing. So, that would be another very, very critical area of, the micro to macro, constant connecting and not seeing the two as different. And then I think what I started with the wisdom bit, your ability to link the three, the emotion, uh, the normative worldview, and the thinking and the action. And you'll find that it's also a problem in our sector. I would say the most successful ones, for instance, say a Narmada Bachawan, actually had the best intellectual resources, the deepest of the passionate and people who actually undertook action. Whereas, because today it's a thinking conversation, I will be critical, self-critical again. And just to also help us understand, Oxfam is brilliant in terms of the intellectual resource we have. It has passionate people. But the work on the ground, we have believed that, it will be done by partners or someone else. I think that's where we are inadequate. One can then also move into that there's a larger architecture. I have no problems with that. That could be a way of working. But those three things coming together also would be very, very critical. You make a powerful institution, initiative. Yeah. So those are the few features I think which are very, very central. But I would just come back to the idea of courage in a very serious way.
So I'm going to nudge you one more level granular maybe, and that will also let me, I've just opened the chat. So Dr. Anita Patil's question, Shilpa's question, because she's talking about does experience come into picture when we talk about wisdom? And Shilpa is also saying, what do we need to do? So to build these capacities, what you're speaking about in terms of this collaboration, macro pictures, and then being able to look at things through the normative frame. What are ways? Do you see coalitions? Do you see joint projects? Do you see, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, just to open up the imagination box, I'm sure I hope you have, thought through ke ye hoga to, it would be great. And a lot in our audience are also people who actually are in spaces where they can have these experiments happen. So what do we play with? How do we experiment to build these capacities? If you have anything on that.
Sure. So that's a slightly difficult one because to this I would not be able to comment in a very structured way. But I'll certainly try and respond to it. My work has taught me that no change happens by working in one part of the system. And therefore, that would be one of the first things that we'll need to do, is to identify the different spaces within, say, the social sector. Let's just pick the idea of collaboration, because you talked of, say coalitions. I think, how do we actually build a reasonable amount of consensus, or I would say not consensus, at least traction amongst donors, that they cannot promote competition in any way, and they do, knowingly or unknowingly, they do. So from donors to the broad leadership of the sector, how do we talk of bringing in collaboration? The second would be to actually start what you're doing, to nudge many people, including people like me, to write more about the idea of collaboration. What is needed fundamentally? Because I do think that a lot of this also needs articulation. The way you're nudging me, every day I'm thinking about inequality, how to change inequality, but how to do collaboration is something that I'm not systematically looking at. Intuitively, I've done that. So the second I would say is very, very critical, is to actually do that. The third is then to intentionally seed projects. And when I say project, I mean a broader idea of project. So seed ideas, seed initiatives where you are promoting collaborative work. And where it is really not the idea that you need to achieve. You get into a coalition, the delivery of the stated objective of the coalition is not critical, but the idea of working together is critical. Yeah. So that's the third bit. I do also very strongly believe, and that's something which I was saying earlier, is can we have an understanding of the architecture or the landscape of the social sector? While I was being self-critical of Oxfam, that was to make a specific point. But once you understand the landscape of the social sector, you'll probably say, no, Oxfam should do what it does. No point Oxfam coming onto the streets also. You're not able to then even do those reports that you do well, which gets traction. So, that's the broader understanding of the architecture, and which is also of then through a collaborative framework. I am absolutely clear. We work with such limited resources, really limited resources.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, not just money, even in terms of people, it's very limited.
Yeah.
And then we have the challenge of you are really facing opposition at every step.
Yes.
It is not facing competition, it is facing opposition. And these are two different things. A shoemaker would face competition from another shoemaker, but not opposition. Whereas when you are saying that I want a gender just society, 99% of the world, which is patriarchal, is opposing you.
Yeah.
There's a conflict also happening. So, in that, to have that larger architecture thought through, that how do we come together and constantly articulate it, that this is why we work together. And then, in terms of the practice, I think we'll also obviously then need to have the humility, the regular ways of working, which is so critical. As in, if a donor thinks that by just writing a check, he or she should be deciding the course of the coalition, that's very, very unfortunate. So, everybody works with humility according to the role that's in the larger architecture. So I've probably not gone into the way you would, because you use the word drill this down. I didn't do that because I still look at,
the macro.
That's me. So I look at
the macro,
big picture.
yeah.
But those are the fundamental building blocks. But how do you then do the writing bit? Those are operational bits, and I'm sure we can, find ways of doing it.
So there is so many ways, so many directions for this conversation, and I'm taking the privilege to not take all chat comments and kind of nudge this into some areas. I'm also excited to explore. I think, but let me nudge this towards Amitabh. In dealing with all that you deal with, what anchors you? Like we've spoken about courage, but like, are there any personal practices? Are there any trade secrets you want to give us that if we do this daily, we'll keep sane? Like I feel like your exposure to the craziness is many magnitudes higher. And what's the anchoring secret? What's the thera? What is that?
So Abhishek, just in terms of the personal bit, first a sharing that I must tell you that I have been a very, very stable person in terms of my views around what I'm looking at. They do not change. And with largely an optimistic framework. But yes, in the last few years, I do feel very unsettled. So when you're asking me this, it's also to share it. The cacophony around us is so strong that I would be dishonest in saying that it's not troubling me and disturbing me. For forever in my life, there were several moments where, one very interesting moment where somebody was inviting me with a very interesting role in the UN, New York. And I was very clear that come what may, I can't leave this country. And this is a different kind of nationalism. I hope, it's just about because this is where the change needs to be made. And I was very clear that, it didn't even cross for a second. In the last few years, sometimes I feel that, oh my God, what is happening to this country? And can I really, work here? So to say that obviously there are no trade secrets. It is just being honest. And the trade secret, I would still say, is that my deep abiding faith in the values that I talked of. Because for me, it's not an alternative. I really, I find it difficult when people are able to have alternative value frameworks. Values can't be alternative. Strategies can be alternatives. But your value framework can't be. You can't have two alternatives. That okay, I need to be honest, but I can also be pragmatic. I don't understand how people juxtapose the two. And you would have heard this in daily life all the time. But that I don't understand. So maybe that's what keeps me going. That if I'm around, then I need to do this. This is the only thing that I know I have to do. Yeah. So trade secret. Obviously, I'm sure there are many people who are able to give those trade secrets better. And I want that inspiration now from lots of people. And which comes. Whether it is, say, the farmers' protest that we saw, or the NRCCA protest that we saw, that gave me immense inspiration. And maybe that's what also keeps me sane. Those maybe which are small or big victories, that gives me that sanity, the inspiration to continue in terms of what we are doing. And on this, just maybe one, not a trade secret, but a problem. I'm also very deeply rooted in social science, and I'm not an academic myself, but I do engage with the social sciences. I think that at times is a problem when the chips are down, when the context is so difficult, when I'm actually looking at, say, the voting percentage every election, then I know the next election what the result is going to be. But I think you need a little bit of more hope and not so much of trust only in the science of it. So that's what I would say. Sometimes you have to say, okay, seems improbable according to what my psephologists say, but we will make it happen.
Lovely. That tadka of optimism is really so beautiful.
Yes.
It just feels like there is the whole dish of values which I can feel the solidness with which you're holding them, and then there's a nice dash of optimism making it all come together in a delicious meal. Yeah, that's a joy. In the bigger picture, Amitabh, since macro is a passion, and we are seeing, or from where I'm seeing there's definitely climate change, environment related impacts, there are social justice issues, there's big tech which is kind of creeping in, there's geopolitical tension. So there's this large web, it seems like a large interconnected web. And I think what I'm trying to get or to understand is this like a big jigsaw puzzle where each of us works with our pieces, or are there some acupressure points where we need to concentrate our energy so that if done right, there'll be a leverage of the impact we can create? Are there any such leverage points, or are we all sitting with our puzzles and reaching out to each other to make the larger frame? How do you see this macro and our actions in context of such large forces that are at play?
Yeah. So on that, Abhishek, I would say that we need to continue working in the areas that we work in. However, with a very, very strong recognition of the interconnectedness and interdependence of the pieces that you're working on. That is really, so when you say acupuncture points, it is pretty much, I would say, every point is an acupuncture point. And how do you drill more effectively in your own area is critical, while you're constantly making the relationship. So
with the macro,
it is the macro. So when we say inequality is growing, it is also leading to climate change. One needs to understand that the climate change is not independent of the economic system that we have created, which is leading to these obscene levels of inequality.
Hmm.
We also need to understand that these inequalities are leading to fundamentalism of multiple kinds. The chest thumping nationalism that you see is also a response to the kind of inequality which is part of the way we have looked at globalization. So
Right.
that interconnected, I'm totally all right. And I would actually encourage us not to say that, okay, there's only one large umbrella under which we need to work. The conception needs to be there that if I'm working on climate change, I must also look at questions of social justice. I must look at questions of economic injustice. I must look at questions of human dignity because they're all related. Uh, and if I'm working on questions of democracy, you will need to look at questions of economic inequality, the carbon inequality that you see. So that that's how I would look at it. That let's understand that it is all woven together,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you'll not. In fact, I would say actually it would be foolish of us to believe that we can get one piece right. We'll not be able to get that one piece right.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So you'll not be able to get climate just policies if you still continue with the neoliberal frameworks, the capitalism that you're looking at.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you'll have to work with, if you're a
Work with-
climate activist, then you'll have to say, okay, I also need to work on questions of economic justice. As in, you can't be working on democratic rights and nurturing democracy and not working against patriarchy.
Hmm.
It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So yeah, those are the linkages.
So the linkages, and then
Do
working with
rope it well.
yeah, working with that big picture, and then, like you said, every point is an acupressure point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the big picture I think is definitely there. But I'm just, I mean, so yeah, there are a couple of things coming to me, but one question I wanted to take in the direction of our social sector culture. There's a formal culture, and then there's the grapevine, and then there are those conversations on chai which are informal, and there are certain gifts we have, and there are certain shadows we have as a sector, right? And
Yeah, sure.
It's a joy to belong to this fraternity for sure. Like I feel the joy of belonging to the biradri, and yet, like from a self-critical lens, what does the collective family of do-gooders or people who are trying to do good, what do we need to tweak in our culture? What do we, apart from these capacities, I'm now asking more at the informal discourse level, what are we taking convenient routes? I wonder what tweaks at a culture level you feel, at a culture level.
Okay. So okay. So I'll be harsh. One, I do believe that, and I don't know if it was my romanticism of being when I was a child and then I was growing up of a young person. But I do feel that the sector has moved away from, and I think that's a fundamental shift we have made, and which is a hugely problematic shift, is that our vision and mission is more for the formal spaces. The informal spaces are more for livelihood and a career. That I think is a huge problem. And so in the formal space we'll talk of big things, but in the informal space, we are not moved as much by those big ideas, which I find hugely problematic. Because that for the sector from where we started, if the normative is kind of divorced from your actions, and at least from your own being, it's unlikely that our actions are going to be authentic. And that I certainly see, we need to change that. That's how do we ensure that what we're doing it with passion. And there's a larger than conversation. Why does it happen? Is it because these are funded projects, etc., that you're actually fighting someone else's battle? You are not the one who's created it. That's why this whole professionalization is a problem. Is it my own battle? Did I come to it because somebody is paying me a salary, or because I do think that I cannot live with injustice. The Deen Bandhu, Charlie Andrews, coming from outside the country, and he adopted the Indian national movement as his own movement. Uh, Therefore, there was oneness with the mission of the movement. Uh, but that I don't see. As in, people can come from wherever. In a way, what I'm saying is that the mission becomes so important that you can attract people, and that's not happening. So that, I think, in terms of culture, I would say certainly there's a big, that's one of the fundamental fault lines I feel. And in that, the more professionalization, the greater disconnect with your own passion, with your commitment to your values that you want to work with. And then I can talk about a few other things. I'll be very brief on that, because this I think is the most central in terms of the culture bit that you talked of. The other bits, I would say, I do think that there is a complete, unfortunately, even in our sector, the India and Bharat divide within the sector as well, which is, India and Bharat, people who speak English, people who don't speak English, people who can actually write, and people who can't write. So, that also, the culture is very, very strong. And we have not been able to overcome that divide. That's the unfortunate bit. And there are ways of actually perpetuating it. So that, I think, is the second. The third, I think, which I've started feeling now, we are not adequately fun-loving. And maybe that's not me, but I understand, working with people, leading teams for a long time, I've understood that maybe my need to have fun is limited. But largely, all of us need fun.
Yes.
And we don't do that. We don't promote that. We don't engage with it. It is either a very serious, gambhir conversation all the time, like you and I are doing at the moment, or then it is, as you said, pretty much the cooler kind of conversation, which is gossip and not constructive. So how do we also bring in fun, geet, sangeet, etc., etc.?
Yes, totally. I think even for Blue Ribbon, when we ask people what percentage of time do we have pure fun, and these are young people, our score was between 10 and 15%. And we're like, oh God, we're just like getting too serious, too much adhyan is happening, too much. So hear you on those, Amitabh. So I have we had one announcement to make, and I have a question also. So what I'm going to do is maybe pop that question and then make the announcement for a program that we're doing, because I think that will also bring us to a pause here. And I'm going to frame it. I guess it's going to come out as a slightly complex question because there are too many questions in one, but whatever.
So Abhishek, can I just very quickly, because I just saw the chat and there's a question on courage. If you're going to link it, otherwise I'll be very brief. I know you.
Sure. No, go for it. Go for it. Sure. Diego's question.
So could you define what you mean with courage?
Yeah.
So I would, I'm sure all of us define it differently. But for me, courage would be to stand straight, even though your normative framework is being challenged, it's being tested, and it will lead to uncomfortable, difficult path for you. So that's really the courage that I would talk of. And that's very, very important, that you're unwavering in your commitment to your values and how you define those values, how they would play out. That does not change. This in no way, because that, the follow-up point that's being made is it should not be in any way be confused with being stubborn. We need to be the most flexible in terms of how we function, but not in terms of values. As in, and just to give you that example, can we accept somebody living with somebody's dignity being assaulted, and we say it's all right because there are other pieces that I need to compromise on. That's unacceptable to me. But otherwise, absolutely yes. As in arrogance and stubbornness is something that we need to avoid at every cost. Sorry, just a brief one.
No, that helps. I
Go,
think
but
that's,
yeah, yeah,
thanks for clarifying that as well.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, let me pop this question and then do the launch. We have a 60-second video on what we were launching. I think, so since it came to arrogance, I think questions of privilege come up for me also. And there's a privilege, I'm sure of that each of us carries, that we're even on the Zoom call with internet connection. So privilege. And so relationship with privilege, your relationship with, as a leader, what are questions you're holding today? I'm sure you're in a constant inquiry process. Just by hearing you, I can imagine. So as a leader, where are you? What kind of questions are you holding for yourself? What's your relationship with privilege? So just personally as a leader, where would, yeah.
So that's a fairly my relationship with privilege is something I need to question every day, every minute, because I have grown up with privilege and I continue to have such enormous privilege that I feel that my ability to think without those privileges must be very, very truncated. So the only thing I can do is to constantly question. And I'll again be very, very honest that my feeling is that we as a group, and I'm not talking of just myself, because it's a journey. We've been able to, in many ways, at least look at many privileges in our sector also, except class. Class is something that we have not been able to uh, deconstruct. So caste, gender, lot of times knowledge, though we still continue working with knowledge as a privilege, etc. But class is something that we have just not been able to deconstruct. In everything, the way we just function, it's just the way patriarchy is. But I think patriarchy we are able to kind of challenge in many ways, but certainly not class. And it's so deep rooted that ultimately it changes the worldview that we work with. So on that I can only respond by saying that it is a journey that we are on. Sorry, Abhishek, you had two parts, but I got so involved with the first part. What was the second part?
Questions you're holding as a leader. The questions, alive questions for you right now.
Yeah. Okay. So one question that I have started now pushing. Now this I'll be very practical, is just the issue of social inclusion in our own sectors. I can now confidently say we've looked at the numbers that if you take the top 25 NGOs in Delhi, okay, just in terms of their size or their volumes, the proportion of scheduled caste, Dalits, Adivasis is going to be way below the actual numbers. We are performing way worse than even what the government is doing. If you look at Muslims, it's going to be pretty bad. On women, we'll be doing reasonably all right. But this whole question, it's almost like empty rhetoric. That we'll need to just look at it. Just look at the 20 largest NGOs. I can tell you, because I've done that, except one, you will not find a leader from either a Dalit background or Adivasi background. So that's a question that we need to. We're constantly talking about it. And the second, the which is the big one today, that are we willing to actually not be bothered by short-term or medium-term organizational interest vis-a-vis the larger political role that social actors need to play? So that's a question that I'm constantly asking. It's a tough one, but I see that all of us are, that the privilege of those institutional resources, etc., etc., we end up, uh, actually working in favor of the privileges and not letting go these privileges, and actually uh, doing the courageous act. What is critical today? Whether you will survive or not is a different point. But I think that's the critical one. That how are we really contributing to what is needed at this historic moment? That's something, Abhishek, I would say very strongly, that even if you're not doing that action today openly, at least we can do 10 different things to promote and support that, to build a more just and democratic society where no Muslim is discriminated against. Nobody is discriminated against. I specifically said because that's the context we are talking in.
So a lot of self-reflection, I think, is the invitation,
Yes.
personally and
Yes.
organizationally. So on that note, Amitabh, we also wanted to make this a launch event for a program that we are excited about. We're coming with as Wisdom Tree. I think over the last 2-3 months, we went across the sector talking to people to understand what's really going on in this whole domain of culture, building leadership. We found that founders are really caught up with just keeping things going on day-to-day basis. Second line leaderships are yet to be built. And we've found our passion, having run Blue Ribbon, is to build culture for other orgs and at a sector level also. So this program's kind of the coming together of our experiences, my experiences working with BRM and with other orgs as well. And we're kind of making this offering, starting this offering today, and bringing that offering to the sector. So it's a 60-second video that we'd love to share. And Ashok, who has made it, is also here. So Ashok, if you can share screen, and is that okay? Can we just have a look at that 60-second what the program is, and then I'll come back to you for some closing comments and questions. So over to you, Ashok, for the launch video for the program. Okay, thank you. That went quick, but thanks, Ashok. That was like a 35-second video. But I think just to give a context to this, so yeah, Diego, these recordings are available. They'll be on YouTube. They'll be on Facebook as well. But just to quickly give a context of what we are trying to do, really build a cohort of people in the sector, leaders and people who they want to cultivate, and take them through a journey, an in-person journey. Hopefully, too much of online has happened. And some deep dive into the kind of questions, Amitabh, you also raised, right? Like personally, andar jhaak ke dekhe, how much are we walking the talk? What is our politics? And what are we grooming? What are we building as cultures in our organization? So that's why developing leaders and intentionally designing cultures. I think that's, so we've designed a journey we're excited about. So happy to share it in your presence, Amitabh.
Thank you, Abhishek. That sounds very, very exciting. And I'm glad that you're doing this. So Ashok, I would only request you to share this with all of us, and maybe slightly slow down the speed of the.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I was just also.
Yeah, I couldn't read every bit that you had.
Yeah, it did come out really fast. So
no, this is fantastic. It's much needed. But the only thing I would say, Abhishek, on this is in the mood of the conversation that we have.
Yeah.
Not to say that this is not exciting. This is really exciting. We certainly need it. We don't do enough of these conversations. So I'm very happy that you're doing it. Kejil and I had this conversation. I can't remember now. Must be 2 weeks, 4 weeks ago, and I was very happy that just to systematically look at these questions is what we certainly need. Having said that, just going back to the time that I was talking of, the historic moment that we are in, we need to also constantly nudge people that the organization is not bigger than the mission that we're talking of. The social sector is a mission, and I think that mission is very, very critical. So how do you find that balance between the individual, the organization, and the mission of broadly the social sector? Because I'm saying mission because I know that there's going to be a reasonable overlap in terms of the vision and mission across thousands of social organizations. So we are in the service as these institutions, in the service of the mission. So somewhere also just going back to the servant leadership idea that somebody like Gandhi talked so much about.
Sure. We're also hoping to reclaim the informal space. Like there's a value to the formal space, but in the informal heart-to-heart spaces, how do we really connect to chal kya rahe, kar kya rahe hain hum log, and through this program, the longing of the heart is also that to meet fellow people and huddle, find an excuse to huddle and really do that. So thanks for that pointer, Amitabh. So I think this final question I have has to do with this historic moment, and you do share a lot in the media. You do share a lot to the outside world. Here somehow I feel it's more an inside world. I don't know, an unconscious feeling of who we are, and it's a moment where I'd love to pass on the mic to you and just invite you to say what you need to tell us. If there's anything that you need to tell us and we need to listen to. So yeah, that's my last question.
No, thank you, Abhishek. Just a big thank you for doing this. These are times when we need to do many more of these conversations. We need, because I've talked of the larger picture. So I will actually now turn the gaze inward, which you were trying to do many times, and I kept pushing you back to the external world. But I think this is the time for also solidarities. So when Sudha Bharadwaj gets arrested, how do we express our solidarity is important. And that solidarity, that's just an example all of us are aware of. But how do we strengthen each other, bring back, whatever support that we can to each other? I think that's the most critical one, to nudge each other that, the path that you're taking might be difficult, but it's critical. So, I do feel that at times, even, what we do say on our family WhatsApp groups, that of the 10 people, I still hope that 7 are sane voices, 3 are not sane, but they're very loud voices. And they're the ones who completely hijack every conversation now. So just standing with that one person, 2 persons who are still voicing the discomfort, the resistance that we have against the kind of new India that's being envisioned is what I would say, So, just seeking solidarity, support, because this is, I think it's a civilizational question, that will we want a society which is built around justice, equality, freedom for all? And it's such a large question that there's no backing off in any way. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Amitabh, and thank you for being on this talk. It was beautiful and very, very powerful for me. I'm sure for everyone else as well.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for to all the colleagues who were here.